The trading post at the edge of the Texas frontier smelled of leather, tobacco, and broken promises. Sarah Mitchell stood behind the weathered counter, her calloused hands arranging jars of preserves that nobody would buy. At 26, she had already buried a husband, lost a farm to drought, and learned that survival meant swallowing your pride along with your dreams. The year was 1867, and the world had forgotten how to be gentle. She hadn't meant to fall in love with a Comanche warrior. Love was a luxury she couldn't afford, like the silk ribbons gathering dust in the corner or the hope she'd abandoned 3 winters ago. But Standing Bear had walked into her life with the quiet confidence of a man who knew exactly who he was, and everything changed. He came to trade buffalo hides for coffee and sugar, his English broken but his eyes speaking a language that transcended words. Week after week, he returned, and week after week, Sarah found herself waiting for the sound of his horse outside. Their courtship had been unconventional, conducted in stolen moments and whispered conversations while suspicious eyes watched from both worlds. Sarah's neighbors warned her about savages. Standing Bear's people spoke of the white settlers who had taken their land, killed their buffalo, and broken every treaty they'd ever signed. Yet somehow, in the space between 2 wounded peoples, Sarah and Standing Bear found something neither had expected: tenderness. Tonight, Standing Bear had come to her after closing time. The last rays of sunset painted the sky the color of a healing bruise, purple and gold. He stood in the doorway, and Sarah saw something in his face that made her heart quicken, not fear, but a deep solemnity that spoke of decisions made and roads chosen. "I love you, I want more," she sighed, the words escaping before she could stop them. She had been holding them inside for months, afraid that speaking them aloud would shatter the fragile thing they'd built together. "I want a life with you. I want mornings and evenings and all the ordinary moments in between. But I don't know how. Your world and mine, they're at war." Standing Bear stepped closer, and in the dim light of the oil lamp, she could see the lines around his eyes, the scar on his shoulder from a battle she would never fully understand. "Sleep in my tent tonight," he said, his voice low and steady. It wasn't a proposition, it was an invitation to a different kind of courage. Sarah's breath caught. She understood what he was offering, not just a night, but a choice. To step across the invisible line that divided their worlds. To trust him completely. To leave behind the safety of her small room above the trading post and enter a camp where she would be the outsider, the stranger, the woman from the people who had brought disease and destruction. "If I come with you," she whispered, "I might never be welcome here again. They'll call me a traitor. And my people will call you an enemy," Standing Bear replied. "Until they see what I see. Until they know your heart as I know it." She thought about the emptiness of her life, the endless days of measuring flour and making change, of smiling politely at customers who looked through her as if she were already a ghost. She thought about the husband she'd buried, a good man who had simply given up when the land wouldn't yield. She thought about the child they'd lost before it ever drew breath, and the part of her that had died that winter night. "What if love isn't enough?" she asked. Standing Bear reached for her hand, his palm rough and warm against her cold fingers. "Love is never enough," he said. "But it is always the beginning." Something in his words unlocked a door inside her chest. She thought about the stories her mother had told her as a child, about pioneers and courage, about people who had crossed oceans and mountains in search of something better. Wasn't that what this was? Not a betrayal, but a different kind of pioneering, a journey into the country of the heart. "I'll need to close up," she said, and saw relief flood Standing Bear's face. "And I'll need to bring my medical supplies. Whatever else I am, I'm a healer. That doesn't change." He nodded, understanding. Sarah moved through the trading post with purpose now, her hands no longer trembling. She packed her bag with bandages and herbs, with the few things she owned that truly mattered: her mother's Bible, a daguerreotype of her late husband, a bundle of letters from her sister back east. She changed into her riding clothes and plaited her hair in a single long braid. When she emerged, Standing Bear was waiting with 2 horses. The moon had risen, full and bright, turning the prairie silver. He helped her mount, and together they rode into the darkness, leaving behind the world Sarah had known. The Comanche camp was 3 hours away, hidden in a valley where the river ran clear and the cottonwoods grew thick. As they approached, Sarah felt her courage wavering. She could see the fires burning, hear the sounds of voices and dogs and life happening in a language she didn't speak. What had she done? What impossible thing had she agreed to? Standing Bear must have sensed her fear. He reached across the space between their horses and took her hand again. "You are not alone," he said. "Whatever comes, you are not alone." They rode into camp together, and Sarah felt every eye turn toward her. Women paused in their work, children stopped playing, warriors reached for weapons before recognizing Standing Bear. An elderly woman with silver hair and a face like carved wood stepped forward, speaking rapidly in Comanche. Standing Bear replied, his voice firm and respectful. The old woman, Standing Bear's grandmother, Sarah would later learn, approached Sarah's horse. For a long moment, she simply looked up at the white woman who had ridden into their camp. Then, surprisingly, she smiled, revealing gaps where teeth had been. She spoke a single word, brave. Standing Bear translated, though Sarah had already understood. She says you are brave to come here. That bravery is respected, even when we do not understand it. He dismounted and helped Sarah down. Her legs were shaky, and she was acutely aware of how different she looked, how her dress and her skin and her hair marked her as an outsider. But Standing Bear kept his hand on her elbow, steady and sure. "This is my tent," he said, leading her to a structure made of buffalo hide, painted with symbols she couldn't read. "You will be safe here. No one will harm you. I give you my word, and my word is known among my people." Inside, the tent was warm, a small fire burning in the center with smoke rising through the opening at the top. Buffalo robes lay on the ground, and Sarah could see Standing Bear's belongings arranged with careful precision, his weapons, his ceremonial clothing, his medicine bundle. "Sit," he said gently. "You must be tired." Sarah sank onto the robes, and suddenly the enormity of what she'd done crashed over her. She had left everything familiar, stepped into a world where she didn't speak the language or understand the customs, trusted a man who by all accounts of her people was supposed to be her enemy. And yet, as she looked at Standing Bear's face in the firelight, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, the possibility of home. "I'm frightened," she admitted. "Good," he said, sitting beside her. "Fear means you understand the risk. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward despite it." Outside, she could hear the camp settling for the night, the murmur of voices, a baby crying, someone singing a song that sounded like a lullaby. Inside, there was only the crackling of the fire and the beating of her own heart. "Why did you ask me to come?" Sarah asked. "You could have kept visiting the trading post. We could have kept our love hidden, safe." Standing Bear was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his words came slowly, as if he were translating not just language but something deeper. "My people are dying," he said. "Not just from bullets and disease, but from the loss of hope. We are being pushed onto smaller and smaller pieces of land, told how to live, how to worship, how to be. Every day, I watch our way of life disappear." He looked at her, and she saw tears in his eyes. "But then I met you. And I saw that not all white people are the same. That there can be bridges between worlds. That love can exist even in the midst of war. And I thought, if we can show them, both our peoples, that connection is possible, maybe there is hope after all." Sarah understood then that this was bigger than just the two of them. Standing Bear wasn't just offering her a place in his tent, he was offering her a role in something larger, something that might help heal the terrible wounds between their peoples. It was a heavy burden, perhaps too heavy for one woman's shoulders. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this," she whispered. Standing Bear took her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "You are stronger than you know. You have survived loss and hardship. You have kept your heart open when it would have been easier. Morning came slowly to the Comanche camp, painted in shades of rose and amber. Sarah woke to unfamiliar sounds, the whinny of horses, the crackle of cooking fires, voices speaking in rhythms she couldn't yet decode. For a moment, panic gripped her chest. Where was she? What had she done? Then she felt Standing Bear's hand on her shoulder, gentle and reassuring, and the memories of the previous night flooded back. Come, he said softly. Let me show you my world. They emerged from the tent into a morning that smelled of sage smoke and cooking meat. Women were already working, tending fires, preparing food, scraping hides. Children played near the river, their laughter a universal language. And everywhere, Sarah felt eyes on her, curious, suspicious, wondering. Standing Bear's grandmother approached, carrying a bowl of something warm and fragrant. She offered it to Sarah with hands gnarled by decades of work but still remarkably steady. Sarah accepted it, surprised to find her mouth watering at the smell. It was a kind of porridge made from dried buffalo meat and prairie turnips, flavored with herbs she couldn't identify. It was delicious. The old woman, her name was Weaving Woman, Sarah learned, watched her eat with approval. Through Standing Bear's translation, a conversation began. Weaving Woman asked about Sarah's skills, her family, her losses. When Sarah mentioned that she knew healing, that she had learned herbs and medicines from her mother and grandmother, Weaving Woman's eyes sharpened with interest. We have sick ones, Standing Bear translated his grandmother's words. The white man's diseases. Many have died. If you know healing, you would be honored here. It was a test, Sarah understood, but also a genuine need. She nodded. Take me to them. What followed was the longest day of Sarah's life. Weaving Woman led her to several tents where people lay ill, a child burning with fever, a young man with an infected wound, an elderly warrior whose lungs rattled with each breath. Sarah examined each one, her hands moving with the confidence of knowledge and practice. She recognized the fever as influenza, the wound as needing drainage and fresh bandages, the lung condition as pneumonia. She worked through the morning and into the afternoon, using her own medicines where they would help, learning about Comanche remedies from Weaving Woman where their knowledge exceeded hers. The old woman showed her plants Sarah had walked past 1,000 times without knowing their healing properties, the inner bark of willow for pain, wild onion for infections, sage for purification. As the day progressed, something remarkable happened. The women of the camp began to gather around, watching Sarah work. At first, they maintained their distance, whispering among themselves. But gradually, as they saw her gentle touch with the sick, her patience with the frightened child, her respectful attention to Weaving Woman's teachings, the whispers changed. Questions were asked. Tentative smiles were offered. One young woman, her belly swollen with pregnancy, approached Sarah in the late afternoon. Through gestures and Standing Bear's translation, she explained that this was her first child and she was afraid. Her own mother had died in childbirth the year before, and there were few experienced women left to guide her. The diseases had taken so many. Sarah took the young woman's hands. I will help you, she promised. When your time comes, I will be there. The young woman, her name was Morning Dove, began to cry. Why? She asked through her tears. Why would you help us? Your people have taken everything from us. It was the question Sarah had been asking herself all day. Why was she here? What did she hope to accomplish? The answer came to her with sudden clarity. Because pain is pain, no matter whose body it lives in, Sarah said quietly. Because a mother's fear is the same in any language. Because we're all just human beings trying to survive in a hard world, and maybe the only thing that will save any of us is learning to see each other's humanity. Standing Bear translated her words, and Sarah saw something shift in the faces of the women around her. Not complete acceptance, that would take time, perhaps years, but the beginning of possibility. The recognition that perhaps not all white people were the same, just as not all Comanche were the same. That individuals could transcend the sins of their peoples. As evening fell, Sarah found herself sitting around a fire with Standing Bear, Weaving Woman, and several other members of the camp. They shared food, roasted meat, corn cakes, dried berries, and though Sarah couldn't understand most of what was said, she understood the feeling. This was what community felt like. This was what belonging felt like. Standing Bear leaned close to her. "You have done well today," he said. "My grandmother says you have a good heart and skilled hands. She says the spirits brought you here for a reason." Sarah looked around the circle of faces, illuminated by firelight. These were people who had lost so much, their land, their way of life, their loved ones. They had every reason to hate her, to reject her, to see her only as a representative of the forces destroying their world. And yet here they were, sharing their fire and their food, giving her a chance. "I don't deserve this kindness," she whispered. "None of us deserve the kindness we receive," Weaving Woman said through Standing Bear. "We only deserve the kindness we give. You gave healing today. You gave attention and care. This is what we return to you." That night, lying in Standing Bear's tent, Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. The grief and loneliness that had lived there for so long began to loosen their grip. She wasn't naive, she knew that the world outside this camp was still hostile, that the conflicts between their peoples would continue, that there would be hardship and opposition ahead. But she also knew that she had found something precious, a place where she could be useful, where her skills mattered, where love was more than just a word. "I love you, I want more," she had sighed just last night, and Standing Bear had said, "Sleep in my tent tonight." Now she understood what "more" meant. It wasn't just romance or companionship, though it was those things too. It was purpose. It was community. It was the chance to be part of something larger than herself, something that might, in some small way, help heal the terrible divisions tearing the world apart. 3 weeks later, Sarah was wakened in the middle of the night. Mourning Dove's time had come. Sarah gathered her supplies and rushed to the young woman's tent, where she found her surrounded by Weaving Woman and other women of the camp, all ready to help. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Sarah feared they would lose both mother and child. But as dawn broke over the prairie, a baby's cry split the air. A boy, healthy and strong, with a voice that announced his presence to the world. Mourning Dove wept with relief and joy, and the women around her ululated in celebration. Sarah cleaned and wrapped the baby, then placed him in his mother's arms. "What will you name him?" Sarah asked. Mourning Dove looked at her with eyes full of tears and gratitude. "Bridge," she said in halting English. "I will call him Bridge. Because he is born in a time when we need bridges between our peoples. And because you, who came from the other side, helped bring him into this world." Sarah felt her own eyes fill with tears. She looked around the tent at the faces of these women who had once been strangers, who had become something more, not quite family, not yet, but the possibility of family. Women who had taught her their remedies, shared their food, trusted her with their most precious moments. Outside the tent, Standing Bear waited with other members of the camp. When Sarah emerged to tell them the news, she was greeted with cheers and celebration. Standing Bear pulled her into his arms, and for a moment, they stood together while the camp celebrated around them. "You have found your place here," he said into her hair. "Not just with me, but with all of us. You have become part of our circle." In the months that followed, Sarah's life took on a rhythm she had never imagined. She divided her time between the Comanche camp and the trading post, becoming a bridge herself between the two worlds. She taught some of the Comanche women English, and they taught her their language. She shared her healing knowledge, and learned theirs. She helped deliver babies, set broken bones, treated illnesses, and comforted the dying. The white settlers in the nearby town watched her with suspicion and sometimes hatred. She was called a traitor, a squaw woman, worse. She lost customers at the trading post. Old friends crossed the street to avoid her. But Sarah found that she didn't care as much as she thought she would. She had found something more valuable than their approval, she had found purpose. Standing